What's up, YouTube? This is Too Raw for TV. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and continue with this listing of at least in my opinion, the top 15 greatest centers in the history of the NBA. And just to do a brief recap, at number 15, I had Nikola Jokic. Number 14, I had the Chief, Robert Parrish. Number 13, Bob McAdoo. Number 12, Wes Unseld. At number 11, Nate the Great Thurman. At number 10 on the list, Patrick Ewing. Number 9 on the list, I have Artis Gilmore. Of course, with Gilmore, I'm including his ABA and NBA accomplishments. If it was just NBA, he probably wouldn't be on the list. At number 8, George Mikan. Number 7 on the list is David Robinson. Number 6 was Big Mo Moses Malone. Number 5, Shaquille O'Neal. At number 4, I have the Dream, Hakeem Olajuwon. I remember Hakeem Olajuwon at the peak of his powers, which was the early to mid 1990s. And he was the best center in the NBA. And I noticed that there's a new generation of fans who are ring counters, and they try to, they listen to Shaq and listen to some of these other people, and they try to tell you that Shaq was the best center in the 90s, and that is not the case. It was Olajuwon, all right? We watched that era. We know what the deal was. Olajuwon took up basketball rather late, if my memory serves me correctly. He was born in Nigeria. I think it was Lagos, Nigeria. Let me make sure of that. He was born January 21st, 1963. He's now 60 years old. Yeah, he was born in Lagos, Nigeria. And he took up basketball late. I believe his first love, his first passion, I think it was soccer. And I don't think he started playing basketball until he was maybe 15. I think he was 15. And he took the basketball like a fish out of water, though. And, he improved by leaps and bounds to the point where he became a basketball prospect. And he left Nigeria to play basketball at the University of Houston under Cougars coach Guy Lewis. And but at the same time, though, he was not I think he wasn't a highly recruited prospect. They just wanted to see what he could do. And I think he was raw, but you could see the talent. You could see what he was capable of then. I don't think he played much his rookie year. But he, along with Clyde Drexler, would form Phi Slamma Jamma, and they would be a dominant force. Now, I don't usually talk about too much of their college achievements, but I do want to mention this. Olajuwon was a consensus first-team All-American in 1984. He led the NCAA in rebounding in 1984. He was the Southwest Conference Player of the Year, the NCAA Final Four Most Outstanding Player in 1983, and his number 34, of course, is retired by the Houston Cougars. It was also at this time that Olajuwon began to be tutelaged by none other than perennial league MVP Moses Malone. Moses Malone loved to work with other players. He would do the same thing with Charles Barkley a couple years later. And he is the one that kind of gave Olajuwon tips on how to prepare yourself for an NBA season, also on improving his post play and rebounding, and he got to the point where the students surpassed the teacher when it came to Olajuwon. And in the '90s, we just never saw a guy like Olajuwon before ever. Olajuwon was picked in the 1984 NBA draft. He was the first overall selection by the Houston Rockets. By that time, of course, the Rockets had lost Moses Malone to Philly. Olajuwon was clearly, even though the draft had players like John Stockton, Michael Jordan, and Charles Barkley, Olajuwon was clearly the most coveted player of that draft. Because as I've said before, Michael Jordan was seen as a guy back when he was drafted. He was seen as a player that would be very good, maybe great, but not first ballot Hall of Fame. He was seen as a guy that would be good, but not a guy you can build your franchise around. And of course, he showed that to be not the case, obviously. In Houston, they already had Ralph Sampson. So Ralph Sampson was, I think, drafted the year before that. So Ralph Sampson was the power forward, Olajuwon was the center, and they were the famed Twin Towers. And in just Olajuwon's second year, this Rocket team made it to the NBA Finals. And they played against that all-time great Boston Celtic team, the '86 Celtics, in the finals. Now, surprisingly, Houston won 2 games in that series. And they had really no answers for Hakeem Olajuwon in that NBA Finals. Matter of fact, let me try to look up some of those numbers if I can. Go to 1986 NBA Finals. Here we go. The 1986 NBA Finals, Olajuwon averaged 24.7 points, 11.8 rebounds, 1.8 assists, 2.3 steals, 3.2 blocks. And, if he had any real help, consistent help from others in that series, they may have been able to upset Boston. But Ralph Sampson only averaged 15 points a game. He only shot 44% from the floor. He was held to 14.8 points and 9.5 rebounds. Robert Reed only shot 42% from the floor. And Rodney McCray had 15. He was averaging 15 points a game. Larry Bird, I think, had his best overall series in the finals. He averaged 24 points, 9.7 rebounds, 9.5 assists, 2.7 steals, 48% from the floor, 37% from three, 94% from the foul line. And ultimately, they won the championship. Now, eventually, Ralph Sampson began to suffer with injury issues, and the team began to focus more on Olajuwon. Ralph Sampson was traded, and they began to focus more on Olajuwon, but then there was a coach, what's his name, man? There was a coach that came in, I just can't think of his name right now, a black coach. He came in, and he had the good idea to focus, Don Chaney, that's it. Don Chaney thought it'd be a good idea to run the offense through the guards. The guards at the time being Kenny Smith and Vernon Maxwell. They took more shot attempts than Olajuwon. Olajuwon's scoring average dropped like to 21 points a game. And as a consequence, the Rockets were not the same team, right? Vernon Maxwell, I think, would average like 22. Kenny Smith averaged like maybe 20, something like that, 19. And the Rockets, they just weren't the same team. And the way that the offense was being run, plus Olajuwon thought the team didn't have enough help around him. It got to a point where he wanted out. He wanted out, and he was almost traded prior to the 1992-93 season. I think it was a chance encounter between Olajuwon and the team owner. They had the conversation. Olajuwon was able to vent his frustrations. I think it was on a flight, if I'm not mistaken. But ultimately, Don Chaney was fired. Rudy Thomas-Johnson was hired as head coach. The offense began to run around Olajuwon. They began to play him more inside out rather than outside in. They got some key additions and some key players. Robert Horry, Mario Elie was there. Sam Cassell was a rookie in '93, I think. Horry, that was his second year. Otis Thorpe was there. And the Rockets, with Olajuwon, I think were the first championship team to focus on the three-point line. Prior to them, none of the championship teams really focused on the three-point line. The Rockets were the first one to weaponize the three on a consistent basis. That plus Olajuwon's stellar post play made that team so deadly, so dangerous. And after Michael Jordan retired, the league was looking for a new face, a new championship team. It would be the Houston Rockets. It went back-to-back titles in 1994, 95, 1993, 94, and 1994 and 1995. Olajuwon won Finals MVP both seasons. And he was finally on as far as the face of the NBA. I mean, this is when people were saying Olajuwon was the best player in the NBA. Now, to me, starting around 1996, Olajuwon began a slow decline. 1995-96, Olajuwon's play was still stellar, but starting around 1996-97, Olajuwon began to become beset by injuries. He was slowing down. He started having issues with tendonitis. And then later on, he had an issue with his lungs. Some type of asthmatic type condition where it was affecting his endurance. And he had a slow decline. He did play with Charles Barkley and later on Clyde Drexler. And then after Drexler's retirement, actually Drexler came in 95, that championship year. But after Drexler retired in 98, then came Scottie Pippen. That failed. And then sometime in the early 2000s, Olajuwon was traded to the Toronto Raptors. And that didn't work. And ultimately, after the 2001-2002 season, Olajuwon retired. As far as his resume is concerned, he played 18 seasons from 1984 to 2002, two-time NBA champion, two-time Finals MVP. He was a 1994 League MVP. He was a 12-time NBA All-Star, six-time All-NBA First Team, three-time All-NBA Second Team, three-time All-NBA Third Team. Two times he was the NBA Defensive Player of the Year, 93 and 94. Five times NBA All-Defensive First Team, four times NBA All-Defensive Second Team, the NBA All-Rookie First Team. He won the IBM Award in 1993. Twice he led the league in rebounding. Three times he led the NBA in block shots. and his number 34 is retired by the Houston Rockets, and he's a member of the 50th and 75th anniversary teams. He averaged 21.8 points, 11.1 rebounds, and 3.1 blocks per game. He scored 26,946 points, grabbed 13,747 rebounds, and he is officially the all-time leader in blocks with 3,830, though in reality, he's not really the all-time blocks leader. That would probably more than likely be Wilt Chamberlain. Are there any knocks on Olajuwon? I mean, can you think about it? He's still seen as the greatest post scorer we've ever seen. Him and Kevin McHale. The edge going to Olajuwon. He was the most dominant center of his era. In his era, he played against centers like Patrick Ewing, of course, David Robinson, Shaquille O'Neal, Rick Smits, Alonzo Mourning. He went up against. He still had a league full of great centers, but he was the cream of the crop. Are there any weaknesses? Well, one thing that I thought Olajuwon was kind of weak at, and it hurts his legacy. Number one, you do have to question, would they have won both those championships if Michael Jordan was still playing during the mid-1990s? I think they would have won one of them, but would they have won both of them? Well, I'll tell you this. I don't know about 1994 because the Knicks lost that finals more than the Rockets won it. I mean, you can see that the Bulls won 7 games without Michael Jordan. They won 7 games with that Knicks team in the semis. And if you add Michael Jordan to the equation, you tend to think that they would have won. I don't know. Another thing that hurts Olajuwon is that in the 18 years that he played, 9 of those years, his team either was ousted in the first round or did not qualify for the playoffs. That is a bit of a stain on Olajuwon's legacy. In some of those years when he was knocked out in the first round, they lost to teams that they should have beaten. So that's pretty much all I got to say on this one. I think Olajuwon is one of the most dominant offensive and defensive centers or players in period that we've ever seen. I don't think we've ever seen a big man as skilled as he was, especially in the era that he played in, able to put the ball on the floor, doing things that we only usually see with guards. I mean, think about it. Olajuwon's amongst the all-time leaders in not just blocks and rebounds, but steals. Steals is a category normally dominated by guards and perimeter players. And Olajuwon used to rack up steals like it was nothing. He wasn't the tallest, biggest center. He's about 6'10" and a half. Even though he's listed as 7 feet tall. For much of his career, he was 255. Though in the best years of his life, in the mid-90s, he got down to 235, which aided his quickness. In the Western Conference Finals in 1995, he had some signature performances. It's one of the greatest playoff runs in the history of the NBA. When you think about it, I think in the first round that year, I believe they beat the Utah Jazz, which is, nothing shy of, sensation to beat the Utah Jazz in the first round. In the second round, they beat the Phoenix Suns, having to come back from a 3-1 deficit. They beat Charles Barkley and his team, KJ and all those guys. Then in the Western Conference Finals, they played against David Robinson, the scoring champion from the year prior, the reigning league MVP, the team with the best record in the NBA. And he destroys David Robinson in that series. And then in the finals, they upset the Orlando Magic, who were seen as the team of the future, with Shaq and Penny, Dennis Scott, Nick Anderson. They beat them. They swept them. It's one of the greatest runs ever. But anyway, that's all I got to say about Olajuwon, man. Hakeem the Dream. Tell me what you guys think.